He paid $1 million for a masked virgin, but what she gave him was worth everything. No name, no past, just a mask and a promise. In the heart of the Colorado mountains, one billionaire makes a choice that leads not to scandal, but to a love he never saw coming. The air in the hidden auction hall was thick with tension and perfume. Velvet curtains framed the candlelit room where only the world's most powerful men sat, faces half-shadowed, eyes gleaming with hunger and pride. Security stood like statues at each entrance. Phones were banned, identities masked. Every breath felt like a secret. This was no ordinary auction. This was indulgence for the rich, cloaked in silk and sin. Peterson James sat near the back, nursing a half-finished glass of bourbon. His tailored black suit hugged his tall frame, his jawline sharp under dim light. His reputation preceded him, a tech titan who built empires with code and crushed competitors with a single click. Cold, controlled, untouchable. He hadn't planned to bid. He had come simply to observe what the darkest corners of wealth looked like. Until Lot 7 stepped into the spotlight, a hush fell across the room like a snowfall. The woman was young, early 20s at most, yet carried herself with an eerie calm. She wore a flowing white gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her hands were folded gently in front of her, and a silver mask concealed her face entirely, save for her pale lips and chin. But it was the way she stood, still, unbroken, dignified, that froze something in Peterson's chest. She didn't tremble. She didn't flinch. She stood like a statue carved from sorrow and steel. The auctioneer's voice cut through the air. Lot 7. Masked virgin, untouched, unnamed, unclaimed. Final item of the evening. Starting bid, $200,000. Whispers stirred like wind through dead leaves. Peterson leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. Some bidders laughed softly, others raised champagne glasses, amused by the item's mystery. But Peterson felt none of that. He wasn't amused. He was curious. And beneath that, something else. Something strange. Protective. The auctioneer continued, "Virginity certified. History wiped. This is a clean slate, gentlemen. A beautiful blank page." That sentence made Peterson's stomach turn. A blank page? He studied her again. Her lips were pressed tight, but there was fire behind the mask. A quiet fury, a soul screaming inside silence. 400,000, a man in a red tie said. 6, another called. 750, someone else added, chuckling. Peterson remained still. Her head tilted ever so slightly in his direction. Or was it his imagination? 1 million, he said suddenly. The room gasped. The laughter stopped. All eyes turned to him. Peterson James, the last man anyone thought would make such a bid. The auctioneer blinked. "Excuse me, sir? 1 million?" Peterson didn't repeat himself. He simply raised his hand and stared ahead, not at the bidders, not at the auctioneer, but at her. For a fraction of a second, her chest rose. A breath. A quiet reaction. The gavel slammed. "Sold!" Just like that, it was over, but inside Peterson something had begun. As she was gently led off the stage, her eyes found his. Even behind the mask, he felt them, burning, questioning, full of both fear and something strange, relief. He didn't know what she had gone through. He didn't know her name. But as the room dissolved into murmurs and fading footsteps, he couldn't stop thinking. What did I just do? This wasn't a purchase. This wasn't a prize. He didn't own her. But something told him he had just bought his way into a story far bigger than he could have ever imagined. And it all began with $1 million whisper. The drive to the cabin was long, winding through miles of untouched forest, where snow rested on pine branches like lace. Peterson didn't speak. Neither did the woman in the passenger seat. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap, the silver mask still hiding her face. No fear, no questions, just silence. The cabin appeared like a secret in the trees, sleek, modern, yet warm. It was all glass and wood, perched above a frozen lake, surrounded by mountains that held every sound captive. It was a place for peace, or for hiding. He hadn't brought her to a mansion filled with staff and spotlights, no yachts, no champagne-soaked celebrations. Just this quiet retreat, because he didn't know what else to do. He hadn't bought her for show. He hadn't even planned to take her at all. He unlocked the door and stepped aside, watching her as she entered. She moved slowly but confidently, her steps feather-light across the hardwood floors. She didn't flinch at the open space or the silence that wrapped around them like a blanket. Instead, she simply looked around, her mask tilting slightly as she took it all in. "Your room is upstairs," he said softly. "First door on the left." She nodded once. That was all. The first night, she didn't touch anything but the edge of a cup and the edge of the bed. She drank tea he left for her and disappeared behind the door without a sound. The second night, she folded towels in perfect neat stacks, though no one asked her to. By the third, she was by the window at dawn, her silhouette glowing in the early morning light, staring into the trees as if they might speak. And all this time, she never said a word. But she wasn't cold. She wasn't scared. There was something almost sacred in her stillness. She existed like she had known silence intimately, like it had once protected her, or maybe punished her. Peterson found himself watching her more than he should have. It started small, passing glances when she poured hot water over loose-leaf tea, her fingers graceful and steady. Then longer looks when she leaned over the kitchen counter to slice fruit, her mask catching the golden light. At night, he lay in bed, listening to her footsteps above, wondering what she was thinking, wondering if she was afraid, wondering if she would ever speak to him. But he didn't press her. He didn't ask, because somehow her silence spoke louder than any words could. He began leaving small things out for her: soft blankets, books, fresh flowers in a glass vase. She never reacted, but they were always gone by morning, taken to her room like gentle offerings had been accepted. And though they didn't share a single conversation, their unspoken rhythm started to settle into something familiar. Each evening, he returned from walks in the woods to find the fire lit. Each morning, he noticed the coffee made just how he liked it. She moved with intention, graceful, thoughtful, never hurried. She cleaned without being told, cooked without recipes. She even mended a tear in his shirt sleeve without him noticing, until he put it on and found it flawless. Still masked, still silent, but always present. And Peterson was changing. The man who once used silence as armor now waited for it like a ritual. He wasn't used to gentleness. He didn't trust softness. But now it filled every corner of his cabin, and every part of him that had long been numb. One night, he found her standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, bathed in moonlight. Snowflakes danced in the air outside like a dream. She wore one of his flannel shirts, oversized, loose, beautiful on her. He didn't speak. He just watched her, heart pounding as if she were part of the woods, wild, delicate, untouchable. She turned slightly, sensing him behind her. And for a moment, they just stood there in the half-dark, hearts beating, breathing the same quiet air. He didn't know her story. He didn't know her name. But he knew deep in his bones that she wasn't his property. She was something rare, something wounded maybe, but alive. And every day she stayed. He wanted less to own her and more to earn her. The snow outside fell gently, thick and slow, like time itself had softened. A hush had settled over the forest, blanketing the cabin in white stillness. Inside, the only sounds were the crackle of firewood and the soft clink of glass as Peterson poured 2 drinks, red wine, smooth and full-bodied. The fire had just begun to glow, casting amber flickers across the wooden walls and glass windows. Shadows danced slowly around the room, and Peterson felt the weight of the night press gently against his chest. He looked down at the second glass, unsure if he'd drink it himself. Then he heard her. Soft footsteps. When he turned, she was standing in the doorway, dressed in a pale knit sweater and leggings that hugged her long legs. The silver mask still covered her face, but her presence was somehow more open, more vulnerable. He held out the glass. She paused, just a second, but then stepped forward and accepted it with delicate fingers. Their hands didn't touch, but the warmth between them did. Without a word, she came to sit beside him on the large leather couch. Not across the room, not in silence and distance as usual. Beside him, so close he could feel the soft whisper of her breath. The faint scent of roses drifted off her skin. Clean, floral, feminine, not overpowering. Just her. He swallowed the urge to speak too quickly. Instead, he waited, let the moment settle. The firelight painted gold on her bare knees, on her hands wrapped around the stem of her glass. Her head tilted slightly as she stared into the flames. She seemed smaller in the low light, quieter than even usual, but not afraid. No, this was different. She was calm, thoughtful. "Thank you," he said softly, "for sitting with me." She didn't answer, but the way her body eased slightly toward him was enough. A long pause passed between them, filled with nothing but the crackle of fire and the rhythm of breath. He turned to her. "You don't have to talk," he said gently. "Not tonight, not ever. But I need you to know you're safe here, with me." She shifted. Her head turned, and though the mask still covered her face, her eyes locked with his. And in those eyes something stirred, a flicker of trust, a shimmer of softness, maybe even curiosity. He felt something swell in his chest, painful and beautiful all at once. Not desire. Not yet, but connection. Slowly she leaned back against the couch, and he did the same. They sat in silence, side by side, drinking wine, letting the fire warm more than just their skin. She didn't pull away when his hand rested gently on the cushion between them, only inches from hers. She didn't flinch when he looked at her again, this time not with questions, but admiration. Hours passed like minutes, and when the fire dimmed and the shadows grew long, she stood. He thought she was going to her room. He stayed seated, watching her walk toward the stairs. But then she paused. She turned around and walked not upstairs, but to him. She reached for his hand. Just a touch. Just fingertips brushing knuckles. Then she gently pulled. Peterson stood without a word. And together, in perfect, aching silence, they walked down the short hallway to his bedroom. Firelight still flickering in the background, snow still falling outside like a silent witness. She entered his room first, standing at the edge of the bed. He stood behind her, unsure, until she turned slowly and reached for his shirt, fingers trembling just slightly. Not with fear, but with surrender. Permission. Her choice. And in that moment, something sacred passed between them. Not ownership, not lust, but the fragile first thread of intimacy. She had followed him, but she had chosen to. And he would spend every breath from this night forward proving he was worthy of that trust. The room was quiet, wrapped in the hush of snow pressing against the windows and the glow of a single lamp beside the bed. The sheets were freshly laid, the room warm with firelight flickering from the hearth down the hall. Peterson didn't stand over her like a man with power. He didn't demand anything. Instead, he sat at the edge of the bed, elbows resting loosely on his knees, eyes soft and steady. He looked at her like she wasn't something to conquer, but something he was afraid to break. She lingered near the doorway. A breath passed. Then another. Slowly, her fingers lifted to the edges of her silver mask, hands trembling just enough for him to notice. She hesitated. He didn't speak, didn't reach. He only gave her stillness. Her gaze never left his as she finally lifted the mask from her face. It slid free quietly, and there she was. Natasha. No titles, no labels, no chains. Just her. Her face was not the polished beauty of magazines. It was real, fragile, alive. High cheekbones tinged with soft pink, a faint scar near her jawline, eyes the color of stormy skies and past pain, lips pale, parted with breath. She looked like a secret kept too long, like something the world had tried to erase, but failed. Peterson's breath caught, but he didn't let awe turn into pity. He stood slowly and stepped toward her, not as a man wanting a woman, but as a heart recognizing another soul. His hand came up, gentle as snowfall, and cupped her cheek. Her skin was warm, soft, slightly damp. "I won't hurt you," he whispered. "Ever." She closed her eyes and nodded. And then they were no longer strangers. He leaned in, lips brushing hers, barely there like mist. It wasn't a kiss to take. It was a kiss that asked permission. She gave it. The second kiss was deeper, hungrier, but still patient. His hands found the hem of her sweater, and he paused. Their eyes met again, her unspoken yes shining clear. He undressed her slowly, like unwrapping something precious, not exposing her, but welcoming her. Her body was soft and bare beneath the low light, untouched by cruelty for the first time in too long. She didn't cover herself. She trusted him. Peterson kissed every inch like a vow, not rushed, not greedy. Every touch was a word, every caress was a promise. And when he laid her down beneath him, skin to skin, their rhythm was not about pleasure. It was about freedom. He moved with her, not on her. They fit like rivers finding their course, natural, tender, deep. They didn't speak, but their breath, their bodies, their trembling hands told stories no language could capture. Her fingers curled in the sheets, then in his hair. And when it was over, when the storm inside both of them had finally gone quiet, she turned to him, resting her cheek against his chest. That's when she cried. Not sobs, not noise, just tears that slid from her lashes, silent and honest. He didn't ask her why. He didn't speak at all. He only pulled her closer, wrapping both arms around her, burying his face in her hair, and holding her like the world might try to steal her again. She cried herself into sleep. He stayed awake, watching the snow, memorizing the shape of her breath, the softness of her in his arms, the way it felt to finally be trusted. He didn't feel like a man who had bought a woman. He felt like a man who had been chosen by someone who had every reason not to. The snow had started to melt, leaving the pines soaked and the cabin surrounded by soft mud and birdsong. Winter was retreating, but inside the cabin, something entirely new had begun to bloom. 3 weeks had passed since she first stepped into Peterson's bedroom and never left. Days bled into nights without tension, without fear, only warmth. She still barely spoke, but her silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of defense. It had become a quiet language between them, made of glances, of fingers sliding gently down spines, of shared breaths in the dark. She had started to smile, soft, fleeting curves of her lips that stole his breath. Sometimes she'd steal his shirts from the drawer and curl up by the window, reading weathered novels he didn't even know he owned. Sometimes she'd fall asleep against his shoulder while he worked, trusting him with her weight and warmth. She had learned the smell of his neck, the shape of his laughter, the tender way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. And he, Peterson, once stoic, once made of steel and schedule, was undone by her. He craved every sigh, every fingertip, every sleepy post-midnight kiss pressed to his chest when the world outside went still. Their love wasn't loud. It was not some crashing fairy tale. It was slow, sacred, like watching the first flower crack through frost. They made love like it was healing, not hurried, not driven by hunger, but soaked in reverence, long kisses, lingering touches, holding each other like they were afraid to let go even in dreams. And still, he didn't know her name. He had never asked. Not because he didn't want to know, but because he wanted her to choose when to tell him. And then came the morning that changed everything. Sunlight spilled into the room like honey, pouring across the bed, their tangled limbs, the half-folded sheets. Her hair was splayed across the pillow, eyes barely open, lips parted in a dreamy breath. Peterson had already been up for hours, quietly preparing her favorite, strawberries, toast with honey, and a warm mug of cinnamon tea. He brought the tray into the room and set it gently on the side table. She stirred, eyes fluttering open, and smiled at him sleepily. "You're spoiling me," her soft voice teased for the first time that week. He smiled and sat beside her, brushing her hair gently back from her face. His hand lingered against her cheek, thumb caressing the softness below her eye. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded, heart fluttering. He stared into her, the way her eyes always seemed to be hiding 1,000 stories, 1,000 wounds, 1,000 beautiful things she hadn't said. "What's your name?" he asked. "The real one." Her smile faded, but not with fear, just stillness. A pause. She studied him. Maybe she was weighing the risk. Maybe she was checking his soul for cracks. Then finally, she whispered, Natasha Matthew." He stilled. Completely. The name struck him, not like lightning, not with shock, but with that strange ache of something that finally fits. That name, it rang like something old, something right, like a melody he'd heard in a dream. A name that felt like it had been written somewhere inside his chest before he ever met her. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, until a soft smile curled across his lips. He laughed, quiet and full of disbelief, like he had just found something priceless hidden in plain sight. And then tears filled his eyes. Not from pain, but because in that one moment, with that one name, everything made sense. He touched her face with both hands, leaned in and whispered, "Natasha, it's beautiful." His lips found hers, and the kiss wasn't passion or lust. It was home. A kiss that said, "You are known now. You are real. You are safe." And for the first time, she cried not from fear, not from sorrow, but because she finally believed she was loved for exactly who she was. They never returned to the city, never booked a honeymoon, never mailed out invitations. There were no bouquets, no bridesmaids, no tuxedos. There was no altar, no aisle, no guests holding up cameras, capturing a love the world didn't deserve to see. There was just them, a man and a woman who had once lived in silence and now stood wrapped in something too deep for language. Behind the cabin, where the trees bowed gently to the lake's edge, Peterson had cleared a small space. Moss softened the stones underfoot. Wildflowers, plucked from the edges of the woods, rested in a glass jar nearby. It was morning. The light was pale and golden, dripping through pine needles and painting their skin with warmth. Natasha wore no gown, just a soft cream dress and bare feet in the dewy grass. Her hair fell down her back in gentle waves, the wind teasing it like an old friend. Peterson waited for her by the water, wearing nothing more than a clean, white shirt, sleeves rolled, hands trembling just slightly. Not from nerves, from awe, she stepped to him and he took her hand. No priest, no witness, no crowd. Just heartbeats, just breath. He slid a thin gold ring onto her finger. Simple, elegant, like her. His voice was low but steady. "I bought you," he said, his throat tightening. "But I didn't expect to find you. Not the mask, not the silence, not the mystery. You, Natasha. Every day since, I've fallen deeper into your eyes, into the woman you are, the woman you choose to be." He paused, eyes damp but shining. "And today I don't want to own you. I want to belong to you, if you'll have me." Tears glistened in her eyes, but she smiled, soft and glowing like sunlight on still water. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me back what no one else ever did," she whispered. "Choice. You didn't rescue me. You saw me and let me find myself again." There were no vows written in a book. Only two people, standing before wind and sky and earth, promising each other a forever that needed no audience. He kissed her there by the water. Slow, sure. Their lips moved like a prayer spoken from soul to soul. And just like that, they were married. Not by law, not by tradition, but by love. Pure, unshakable, earned. They returned to the cabin hand in hand, the sun following them like a blessing. That night, they didn't celebrate with music or dancing. They celebrated with whispers under the blankets, with hands curled into hands, with laughter tangled in kisses. In their bedroom, where secrets once lived, they made space for tenderness, for healing, for a love not built on fantasy but truth. Their bodies no longer sought reassurance. They moved with confidence, knowing they were no longer hiding. Each touch said, "I'm here." Each breath said, "You're safe." Each night became a new page in a story neither of them believed they'd ever have the right to write. And even though the world outside would never know the vows they exchanged, even though no photos would be framed on mantles or cakes cut or dances shared, the truth of their love lived louder than any celebration. It lived in the way he looked at her across breakfast, like she was still the most beautiful mystery he'd ever been given. It lived in the way she brushed his hair from his forehead when he read too late into the night. It lived in silence. And in silence they had become whole, because some love stories don't need to be seen. They only need to be felt. And for Natasha and Peterson, forever started the moment she took off her mask, and he saw her not as something to claim, but as someone to cherish.